A couple of weeks ago, when we were in Romans chapter 6, specifically verse 21, we talked a little bit about the idea of bearing fruit. And I talked about it in that time about being free and from John chapter 8, etc. But Paul has used that same imagery of bearing fruit again in Romans chapter 7, verses 4 and 5. So I want to talk about it a little bit more closely today. Again, there'll be a little bit of a repeat from the Sunday message. The specific video I did, apart from the sermon that was from December the 20th, but the video that I did later that week, I think it was the 23rd, covered fruit from the perspective of being free. Free from righteousness is how Paul said it in Romans 6:21. That is that we were not righteous. We could not be righteous because we were living in sin. Our master was sin. But Jesus said that we might be able to follow him, and the fruit that we would bear from that freedom would produce 30, 60, or even 100-fold. He shared that parable in Matthew chapter 13, for instance. So in Romans chapter 6, 21 and 22, Paul shared that we all bear fruit, but the kind of fruit that we bear, or that we bore, if we are now a Christian, that we bore was fruit that would produce shame. In other words, the fruit that we bear is based upon our allegiance. If our allegiance is to sin, then we will bear bad fruit. If our allegiance is to God, then we are to bear good fruit. So, with that, in Romans chapter 7:4, Paul wrote that those who have died with Christ, and therefore we have been raised with him, Romans 6:11, we bear a different kind of fruit. We bear a fruit that is for God. So what kind of fruit is for God? Well, specifically, I believe that Paul is talking about our holiness, which manifests itself as fruit of the Spirit. And we see the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5, specifically verses 22 and 23, where Paul says that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The fruit is made real in us. But Paul spoke, we are to bear fruit for God. So the question is, can we bear fruit for God that is being produced in us? As God is producing fruit in us, that love, joy, peace, patience, etc., as that fruit is bearing fruit within us by God, can we then produce fruit for God? And the answer is absolutely yes. As our life becomes sanctified, which is the main emphasis of Romans chapter 8, we are to share the fruit within us for the benefit of others. That is, we have the opportunity to use the fruit that God has placed within us to serve him for his glory. As Romans 7:6 says, we serve in a new way of the Spirit. So we see the contrast that Paul has painted in Romans 7:5. If we follow our passions, then we produce the kind of fruit that he mentioned in Romans 6:21. This fruit was produced by our members, by the law that was given to God. But we have already been warned not to use these members. If you go back to Romans 6:13, and in the sermon I talked about what these members are. This is from head to toe. This is our fingers, our elbows, and down to our toes, everything. Our members will produce something. Are we producing good for God or not? If we allow our members, such as our fingers and our hands, which is what I can get before you, or our minds, or our mouths, or whatever, to be used for sin and instruments of unrighteousness, again, Romans 6:13, then that will bring fruit that leads to death, Romans 7:5. Instead, we are to use them for God's purposes. God has redeemed us, and by redeeming us, he redeems these same members of our body. We are to use them for righteous living, also Romans 6:13, as we serve in this new way, being led by the Spirit, Romans 7:6. So once again, we see Paul repeating himself, and thus Andy repeating himself, to ensure that Paul was making his point clear to the Roman church at that time. He has repeatedly said we will bear fruit. And the fruit that we will bear will be the result of our members, our body from head to toe, being at work. The question is, will the members be at work following our passions or following God's passions and God's purposes? If we say that we are Christian, then we are claiming to follow Christ. And if that is the case, then our members should be bearing fruit for God. We should be living according to His purposes. And as we begin a new year, perhaps it is time for us all to take inventory of the type of fruit and how much fruit we are producing for God.